The truth about the LA fires. Before we start this video, like, share, comment and subscribe. It helps out with the algorithm. As we speak, the La La Land of celebrity and a symbol of Western cultural soft power is currently burning. Looting is becoming rampant and whole neighbourhoods are smouldering ruins. In this video we shall detail the truth of the LA fires, firstly by going over the DEI links to this and the all-pervasiveness of the now apparent competency crisis across the civilised world, both East and West. And then secondly, we shall then delve into the clear and incontrovertible connections to the use of fire and arson as a military tactic of the demiurge, as it appears in both the Old Testament and the Zohar of the Kabbalah. Thus, without further ado, let us get into the video. The bell of Gion Monastery in India echoes with the warning of the impermanence of all things. The blossoms of the Sala trees teach us through their hues that what flourishes must fade. The proud do not long endure, but vanish like a spring night's dream. Even the bold and brave will perish in the end. All are as dust before the wind. The Tale of Heike, Chapter 1. To begin this analysis, we will begin reading through a thread on X by Chad Crowley, providing an overview of how civilizations crumble due to their inability to solve the most rudimentary of issues, by bureaucratic bloat and a lack of functionality within that said bloat. He cites primarily Joseph A. Tainter's, quote, "The Collapse of Complex Societies," unquote, as the main framework for this exposition of the concept, to refer to my own work on the cyclic collapses of civilizations. I also covered the majority of these issues that we're about to bring up in my 434-page 2021 work, Rise and Fall, a Discourse upon the Phenomena of Civilization and Decline. So, to begin with that thread, quote, "Let's talk about collapse. Fires rage in Los Angeles, and no one can put them out, a clear symbol of a civilization unable to solve even its most basic problems. Joseph A. Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies provides a framework to understand why this happens. Civilizational collapse is no relic of the past or mere curiosity for court historians, whose interests often veer into the irrelevant and removed from the pressing realities of today. Collapse is a recurring phenomenon, an inevitable stage in the life cycle of societies, and the West faces internal fractures and accelerating decline. It is imperative to understand the forces that have undone great civilizations before us. In The Collapse of Complex Societies, Joseph A. Tainter provides a framework for analysing this decline. As an anthropologist, his approach stands apart from the abstractions of historians. Tainter reveals that complexity, vital for societal advancement, particularly in an increasingly globalised and technologised world, carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. Societies that grow increasingly complex invest more in solving problems through administrative, technological and bureaucratic means, yet these solutions yield diminishing returns. Over time, the cost of maintaining the system outweighs its benefits, creating a tipping point where collapse becomes not just possible but the rational culmination of a managed decline. The West today is approaching this threshold. Institutions designed to safeguard stability and progress have become engines of inefficiency, consuming resources to sustain themselves while delivering little value. More troubling, however, is the ideological rot at their core. Tainter's analysis exposes how societies fail when they lose the ability to reconcile complexity with functionality, but the West's decline is accelerated by its fixation on utopian ideals divorced from reality. I mentioned this in my series, I think it was 7 parts, where I pretty much detail why the managerialist system, this is exactly what is being described here by both Tainter's analysis and also Chad Crowley, the X or Twitter handle that is posting this. In essence, it's the Faustian drive that leads to self-destruction. It's the same idea as the cautionary tale of Atlantis, or the cautionary tale of, of course as well, the Tower of Babel. So all of these things are interwoven together. What we're seeing here is an out-of-touch elite that are completely hubristic. Of course, we're going to delve into it more deeply than that and show that, of course, this rot is all by design. This managerialist system is all by design. And even the choice of elites, the choice of the political puppet class, the political pawns, again are all by design as well. So to continue, chief among these is the obsession with absolute equality, which manifests in policies that undermine competence, cohesion, and trust. Modern institutions prioritize demographic representation over merit, subordinating excellence to ideological conformity. Programs like affirmative action and quotas enforce a belief that all outcomes must be levelled, regardless of skill or capability. The result is a system that sacrifices institutional effectiveness on the altar of symbolic progress. Fields demanding expertise, medicine, engineering, and national defence are increasingly populated by individuals chosen for reasons other than their merit. Of course, I don't think he lays it out here in a certain roundabout way, but the main problem with that is that, again, you're not choosing people based upon their qualifications of merit, but upon their qualifications of their congenital characteristics. That is the direct problem with that. Of course, he does explain that here, but just to make it even more direct, that is the problem with that. So to continue on, this erosion of standards not only weakens critical sectors, but also breeds resentment, as citizens see fairness and competence replaced by ideological orthodoxy. This is what will lead, essentially all across the West, to civil war eventually. And it's not going to be pretty. Such policies are not about solving problems, but are about enforcing control. Utopian ideals of absolute equality have become tools of an increasingly dysfunctional elite, wielded to maintain their own power while deflecting attention from systemic failures. These initiatives serve as a facade, masking the inability or refusal to confront the real issues undermining society's foundations, and the reason for that is the crux of the issues, on the facade of it, on the veneer of it, are the managerial elite. The only way to solve the problems is to get rid of them and to get rid of their ideological rot, which, of course, if you criticise, that is now it's now been branded in a very legalistic sense in some parts of the West as hate speech, as very divisive or offensive speech. So it's very politically expedient and convenient for the political establishment to do that, to essentially outlaw any criticism of them or their policies, under the guise of them supposedly having the moral high ground by championing this, supposed humanitarian crusade for justice, equality, all of these various vapid and vacuous buzzwords. So what you're seeing with that is a political establishment who are, on some level, self-aware that their policies are completely out of touch with reality. They're negative for the vast majority. But to maintain their power, to maintain the gravy train of both money laundering and special interest donor kickbacks, they have to maintain this facade. So it's in their interest to censor. Now, of course, they are the mere veneer of this corruption. The corruption goes deeper than that, and we'll get into that later on. Demographic transformation further accelerates collapse, creating divisions that a complex society cannot sustain. Unlike historical collapses where population shifts were often imposed largely by external forces or geographical or climatic forces, the West's demographic replacement is deliberate, an ideological project rooted in utopian fantasies of global equity. Mass immigration, lauded as an economic and moral imperative beyond reproach, serves as a tool to obscure systemic failures and pacify growing discontent. Rather than addressing the festering rot in infrastructure, education, or governance, elites import new populations under the guise of growth. This transformation fractures the cultural and ethnic unity that once underpinned Western nations, replacing shared identity with competing allegiances. Instead of cohesive societies, we witness the rise of competing enclaves driven by BIPOC identity politics, fracturing unity as they battle for resources and power. This demographic shift is not incidental, it is weaponized. By replacing founding populations, elites create a population easier to control, one less connected to the traditions, history, and identity of the nations they inhabit. This strategy ensures that the institutions of power remain insulated from dissent, as the newly imported underclass relies on those same elites for survival. It is a cynical manipulation that trades long-term stability for short-term dominance, and to just add to that, it will lead eventually to these houses of cards, these structures of political power totally collapsing. They will collapse. There's no two ways about it. I mean, personally myself, I think you're in the last 10 years of a lot of these various Western nations. I mean, for example, the UK. The UK, I give it less than 10 years before you see mass societal strife. You see total implosion of the government. It's reaching thresholds now where the government look totally inept, to the point where no PR campaign can salvage them. No amount of media training is going to be able to do anything. Tainter's insight that collapse unfolds as a slow unravelling, rather than a sudden event, is painfully relevant. The West's decline is marked by missed opportunities for reform, and an unwillingness to address the structural contradictions tearing it apart. Leaders blind themselves with ideological dogmas, buzzwords, pouring resources into symbolic gestures, while neglecting the decay of physical infrastructure, economic stability, and social trust. Crumbling roads, failing schools, and soaring debt are treated as secondary concerns to the pursuit of utopian ideals. Instead of confronting these failures, Western elites double down on globalist ambitions, remaking the world in their image through international economic policies, climate agendas, and mass migration. Again, social engineering. These distractions allow them to avoid responsibility for internal decay while perpetuating the illusion of progress. Yet this house of cards cannot hold. As systems grow more unwieldy and populations more divided, the West's ability to withstand external shocks, or, most importantly, internal crises, diminishes. Tainter's warning is clear. Societies that refuse to adapt to reality are doomed to collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. History offers no guarantees, only lessons. The West's trajectory mirrors the failures of past civilizations, as I mentioned in my books as well, Rise and Fall. But its ideological rigidity and demographic engineering make its decline uniquely self-inflicted. Tainter's work is not merely a study of the past, but a mirror of our present condition, a reminder that complexity, unchecked by reality, leads inevitably to destruction. Survival demands rejecting the utopian fantasies of universal equality and globalism that have hollowed out the West's foundations. It requires a return to the enduring truths of identity, merit, and the natural order, principles that once defined the strength of Western civilization. Without this course correction, the West is destined to join the annals of civilizations that fell, not to external enemies, but to our own hubristic desire to ignore reality, unquote. This entire event represents systemic failure, decades in the making. Failure rooted in decayed leadership, crumbling infrastructure, and misplaced priorities. Throughout all of the West, we see this same recurring pattern of misplaced priorities, and this is only further exacerbated by the accelerating inequality between the have-not and have-yots, which skews the political establishment's cogency and relevance. In short, with their head in the clouds, in a world of their own idealistic and utopian making, they have become entirely out of touch with the reality and the common man. It is to the point now where all it would take is a strong leader with the gumption to take the military initiative and unite an enclave of this broken society, for that said society of the previously civilized world to rapidly crumble. The legitimization of the system and the illusion of its noble lie, its pious fiction that it tells to the imprisoned cubicle monkeys regarding why they would give up 90% of their waking life to work as a modern wage serf, is swiftly losing traction with the general zeitgeist. Individuals are beginning to mentally and in some cases, physically drop out of the society. Of course, before we stray too far away from the video's mainstay topic, we must make note of too that this entire event, all of the supposed policy mismanagement, is part of the architecture of a planned and purely artificial collapse. DEI quotas and the end of meritocracy, net zero, 15-minute cities, the pushing of promiscuity and gender ideology, and the hyper-bureaucratization are not natural occurrences, and if one argues that they are, then frankly, they are disregarding the power of fiat credit and the international monopoly who holds sway over it, thus by extension holding sway over the nations of the world, literally holding the world hostage through fiat. This is entirely down to the last political fumble and media spin designed and intended to bring about what I term as human rotational farming. This is found in the ancient meme of the Satyr Square, of which possesses the 5-lettered palindromic message cryptically presented, which when deciphered declares, the seeder or the demiurge, who is without knowledge of good or evil, turns the wheel of material existence via manipulation. The palindrome effect of the words infer this circularity of the structure of this vivarium of material existence, the cycles that are continual and endless and eternal, the human rotational farming. However, I have covered that topic in other videos and I only mention it here due to the interconnectedness with the topic at hand. Talking about the topic at hand, let us digress and look at the mismanagement of the entire event itself. On January 7th, 2025, in the wee morning hours, the Palisades fire ignited in the Palisades Highland neighbourhood of Los Angeles. The cause is still under investigation, though I am hearing from locals that the firefighters and native citizens of LA are suspecting arson of some kind, but the rapid spread of the fire was certainly down to dry conditions, strong Santa Ana winds, and the lack of resources and the shocking lack of water and fire hydrants to combat the fire. By the afternoon, the fire was growing rapidly, prompting a mandatory evacuation on pain of arrest in parts of the Palisades and Topanga Canyon areas. By the evening of January 7th, the Eaton fire broke out near Santa Monica Airport. Again, the cause is ostensibly unknown, but the fire did spread quickly due to the same dry and windy conditions being present. Once night had fallen on the 7th, the National Weather Service reported wind gusts of up to an anomalously high 99 miles per hour. The Hearst fire ignited in Sylmar due to these suspiciously extreme high winds, adding to the growing crisis. As the morning of January 8th dawned, the fire continued to rage, fueled by those extreme wind speeds. Evacuation orders were expanded to include more areas of Los Angeles and Ventura counties. By the afternoon, the Palisades fire then jumps the 405 freeway, started by embers supposedly carried by the winds, as the official record states, which then threatened even more residential areas. Due to the lack of water and hydrants and the lack of resources, which we shall delve into, firefighters struggled to contain the blaze and, in some instances, had to simply retreat because they could simply do nothing with the absence of resources. By night of the 8th, the Eaton fire had reached the Pacific Ocean, causing totalizing damage to beachside properties. The Hearst fire was partially contained but remained a danger. As of January 11th, 2025, the fire continues to burn, though it is in a controlled state now, with the death toll rising to 11, but this will most assuredly rise in the coming weeks after a full investigation is carried out. Thousands of homes and businesses lie as smouldering ruins, with the convenient nullifying of fire insurance contracts in Southern California occurring a month prior to this event. I believe State Farm, a month prior to this, nullified up to 69%, almost 70% of all fire insurance contracts in the area that was conveniently hit by these fires. Again, nothing suspicious about that. Therefore, by consequence, this real estate will be bought for a fraction of its market value by the architects of this disaster, those who, like vultures, stand to gain from this manufactured mayhem, and the residents will have their livelihoods and asset stores of wealth completely eviscerated, as was the plan with this event, with the event in Maui, and with every other event of wildfire or mass deluge occurring throughout the Western world under the guise of anthropogenic climate change. To destroy a civilization, one must eviscerate the wealth of its citizens, and hence what better way to accomplish this than to burn it all down. In less arid areas of the West, simple inheritance tax levied at extraordinarily high levels, coupled with the hidden tax of inflation, can induce the same destruction of wealth and the reconcentration of it in the hands of the predatory financier class, who are in the midst of reshuffling the scenery on the geopolitical stage at present, as is typical for them every 250 years or so. Furthermore, lockdown policy was a push in that direction too, as DEI means destroy everything intentionally. The mismanagement or intentional implementation of the conditions conducive to this disaster was brought about by a culture of systemic and ingrained governmental negligence and socio-racial nepotism. I will do a video soon that will specifically delineate this phenomenon of the ongoing competency crisis, but the particularly culpable factor at play in this situation was DEI and political careerism. Firefighters were chosen not for their physical prowess or calm under fire attitude, but were chosen on the grounds of their ethnicity and gender to fill managerialist-driven quotas that have no basis in objective reality or fighting fires. Indeed, this is not merely affecting firefighting, but is endemic to all departments and institutions throughout the ailing West, and further afield in the crippled East. Socio-racial nepotism, or DEI, has very little comparable urgency in the entertainment industry, with it simply annoying the consumer and vandalising the franchise. But when DEI policies are being implemented in industries and institutions that have a profound and demonstrable effect upon public safety, then that is when all of this takes on a rather sinister and very dangerous side. In the case of LA, the firefighters there could do nothing because in certain areas there was no water in the hydrants. Interestingly, the lack of water in the fire hydrants was also an issue in the Maui fires too. This was something firefighters were tasked with doing at a far more sensible point in our history, when they were not fighting fires, that is, and that was to check the usability and functionality of their equipment and of their ready access to water and hydrants. Moreover, in the last 20 years, in the LA area, there was no controlled burning of brush, which built up and acted as a source of fuel for this inferno. Astonishingly, this build-up of brush got to such a staggeringly dangerous level prior to this absolutely avoidable calamity that it did affect the decision of the insurance companies to nullify fire insurance contracts with clients in the area. Of equal shock and horror, at the same time that this destruction of LA was going on, the mayor of LA, Karen Ruth Bass, was busy in Ghana for the presidential inauguration at the expense of the US taxpayer. Lastly, in the grand smorgasbord of catastrophe here, we have the fact that the fire chief, Kirsten Crowley, also appears to be a DI hire, with her express concern at her inaugural speech to be to diversify and make more inclusive the LA Fire Department, as opposed to, actually fighting fires more effectively. Yeah, that would be strange for a fire department to do. The magnitude of this disaster reverberates with the stench of societal decline and systemic failure at the highest levels, and the irony in this all is that the out-of-touch celebrities whose houses are amongst those torched are those that hate the rest of the normal working folk of the country, be them of whatever colour or creed, and now it appears that their chickens have come home to roost. At this stage, California is a failed state. The state of the American dream has become ground zero of the new American nightmare. In terms of the insurance company exodus from California, the extremely suspicious exodus albeit, we find that companies such as Allstate, American National, AmGuard, Chubb, Travelers, Falls Lake Insurance, Farmers Insurance Group, Nationwide, the Hartford, Tokyo Marion Insurance Company, Trans-Pacific Insurance Company, and State Farm have all reduced their exposure prodigiously within the state of California. It is also estimated that these fires in California could cost insurers up to $20 billion at a minimum, which is the highest in the state's history. Like in Maui, the smart cities or 15-minute city concept can now be more easily implemented, given the scale of the destruction and the evisceration of the residents' financial well-being, with no support of insurance, of course. LCI alignment with the Livable Communities Initiative within both California and Los Angeles is a precursor to the implementation of 15-minute city protocols in LA. The Livable Communities Initiative focuses on increasing density along commercial corridors. Rebuilding efforts in fire-affected areas could prioritise this approach, especially in places like Pacific Palisades. The main business district along Sunset Boulevard could now be reimagined with mixed-use development and improved pedestrian infrastructure, which of course is integral to the 15-minute city megacity which is of course integral to the 15-minute megacity concept, right? The literal digital serfdom concept. Of course, as well in Arcadia, Areas along Huntington Drive or Baldwin Avenue, again, that have been completely torched, could be now redeveloped with a focus on walkability and increased housing options, with, again, mixed-use development of commercial and residential. As Klaus Schwab mentioned in his keynote address to the World Government Summit in 2015, he predicted about Los Angeles that, according to the mayor, people will no longer own private vehicles by 2030, but will be driven around by autonomous self-driving cars summoned via a smartphone app. He further mentioned that LA is an example of a city that will allow highways to be transformed into public parks, implying that LA will be made ready for this radical redesign and transformation by some means. Well, in terms of this event of late, these wildfires that they're supposedly called, torching of vast swathes of LA, we now see by what means that is being achieved. Schwab mentioned these key areas that LA had to focus on. Urban redevelopment. Schwab mentioned that LA often serves as a case study for urban challenges like traffic congestion, housing affordability, and environmental sustainability. Schwab referenced it while discussing solutions like smart city initiatives, or the 15-minute city concept, or digital neo-feudalism in essence. Climate change. LA is vulnerable to the effects of climate change, such as wildfires and rising sea levels. Therefore, this is the justification for these radical and terror-driven social engineering programs to redesign these cities and the surrounding populations themselves. Moreover, this entire plan seems to have been in the works for quite some time, with Tulare Lake, the largest freshwater body of water west of the Mississippi, being drained 130 years ago due to the declared need to irrigate arid lands and put the land into private ownership, which was called by the state reclamation. In the contemporary period, massive dam removals along the Klamath River and other environmental legislation passed in recent years ensured that most, if not all, of the stormwater collected in the years of high precipitation in California have been utterly washed into the sea to save the fish, because supposedly tribal elders told Governor Newsom and Governor Kate Brown that it was a good idea to do so. This has resulted in 95% of all rain or stormwater ending up washed out to the sea. Hence we witnessed the fire hydrants running dry. Billions of gallons of water each year are lost due to incompetency and virtue signalling, ostensibly, though the issue runs nefariously deeper than that. Remember, for developed nations, droughts and famines are always man-made. Billions have been spent on a non-existent high-speed rail, a technique for money laundering and financially flourishing at the expense of the taxpayers' coffers. Of course, how could we forget the misplacing of the $24 billion of homeless funding that just miraculously has disappeared? In 2014, a $7.5 billion water bond Proposition 1, passed by California voters, instructed the state government to build new reservoirs and storage. To date, not one reservoir has been built, with them now being undemocratically torn down, while using Native American elders as PR shields for this intentional sabotage of the state. What happened to this $7.5 billion worth of funding? Who knows? But most probably it was siphoned off by a litany of departments, cleaned, and now sits sequestered in offshore accounts of the political pawns. Last year, Karen Ruth Bass cut the fire department's budget by nearly $17 million, though if you actually look into it, it could be upwards of actually $100 million, or between $48.8 million and $100 million, when you look at all of the various cuts that would have affected the fire department indirectly. Even though California deals with constant wildfires, they have a fire season every year. The budget that came into effect in 2024 proposed a $12.8 billion budget and passed with a 12-3 vote in the proposition's favour. Moreover, they fired firefighters for not taking the needlecraft transubstantiation, and thus this purge of the institutions in 2021 and 2022 was to clear out these institutions of any of the potential ideological naysayers, the despised minority groups, and individuals that still possessed an ounce of integrity. Prescribed burns were also halted and brush was permitted to build up, consequently increasing the likelihood of a wildfire wiping out the entire city. Astoundingly too, in 2023 the state government of California sent to Ukraine vital firefighting supplies and vehicles, along with a host of funding. Like North Carolina and Hawaii, this was all by design to make room for smart cities, 15-minute ghettoization, and to eviscerate the wealth of the citizenry for the planned objectives of the Great Reset digital serfdom. Karen Ruth Bass began her political career as a community activist and went on a total of 15 trips to Cuba in the 1970s. Many of these trips were coordinated by a group known as the Venceremos Brigade, who were a Marxist group started by the Castro regime to subvert American interests, weaken democracies, and spread communism around the world. Founded in 1969, the Venceremos Brigade organised trips to Cuba every year for half a century. They attracted the most radicalised and delusional segments of the American extreme left wing, including overtly Maoist and pro-Soviet communist groups. In fact, an LA police investigator who infiltrated the group testified to Congress saying that, quote, that to be a member of the brigade you had to be a confirmed Marxist-Leninist, unquote. As a brigadista, and then moving up the ranks to organiser for the Venceremos Brigade, Karen Bass visited Cuba every 6 months. Their mission? To radicalise young, impressionable American leftists into terrorist tactics and guerrilla warfare. Members of the brigade were even taught how to construct bombs. Karen Bass admits on her many pilgrimages to Cuba, she went to see Fidel Castro speak several times, even calling him charismatic, and upon his death praised him, saying, "The passing of Comandante en Jefe is a great loss to the people of Cuba." Even though the people of Cuba obviously saw Fidel Castro as a dictator who impoverished their island. Another group, the M19, took its belief in revolutionary anti-imperialism to new extremes, violent extremes. The M19 was the first and only women-created and women-led domestic terrorist group. Since their founding in 1978, M19's tactics escalated from robbing armoured trucks and abetting prison breaks to building their own explosives and carrying out terrorist bombings. From 1983 to 1984, M19 bombed an FBI office, the Israel Aircraft Industries building, the South African consulate in New York, DC's Fort McNair, and Navy Yard, which they, in fact, bombed twice. But that was not enough for them. On the night of November 7th, 1983, the M19 called the US Capitol switchboard and warned them to evacuate the building. Minutes later, the M19 detonated a bomb in the north wing of the US Capitol building. November 7th, 2023 marks 40 years since the M19's bombing of the US Capitol building. Members of the M19 such as Susan Rosenberg travelled to Cuba with and were radicalised by the Venceremos Brigade. The South Los Angeles Venceremos Brigade was led exclusively by Karen Ruth Bass, who is now Mayor of Los Angeles. As you can see, it has been a slow march through the institutions for these extremists, but of course they are mere puppets. They are being fed ideological utopian garbage. If they go ahead with being fifth columnists, they are instructed that they will bring about this idealized society. But that is not the case. They are merely useful idiots. Again, as Yuri Bezmenov stated. Of the LA fire chief, she seems to be associated with DEI recruitment, and was hailed as the first female and alphabet chief, stating that her crucial priority during her tenure was to put DEI policies first. In the first year of her assuming her position as LA fire chief, she implemented a racial and gender equity plan to end systemic, institutional and structural racism and discrimination in LA. This sought to map out the race of every employee to make sure they were racially diverse enough. During her tenure, the launching of the LAFD Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Bureau was established to, of course, increase the bureaucratic bloat and create useless yet high-paying jobs for the cronies. Therefore, it led to the firing of completely competent and skilled firefighters to ensure that other non-competent and rookie firefighters were hired based on no other qualification other than their skin colour, gender or sexuality. Of course, the irony of this, and of feminism too, is that if Western countries were actually institutionally and systemically discriminatory, homophobic or racist, then we would not have institutions and the very systems of power seeking to implement racial and gender equity plans at the expense of public safety and at the expense of the taxpayers. Nor, of course, would that thought even cross the minds of those who chair and inhabit these institutions. In addition to that, checking of fire hydrants was slashed in their frequency, and the Santa Ynez reservoir was completely empty during the onset of the fires. To add insult to injury, as of January 11th, Oregon insisted on sending 60 fire trucks to assist California in the fight against the fires, but California denied them because they lacked the necessary environmental smog certificates on the trucks. Therefore, the Californian state government would rather everything burn to the ground than to permit laxness in observing environmental legislation, and this is frankly the same environmental insanity that got us to this disastrous point in the first place. Given this path of horrific governmental abuse in California, we are also witnessing this same LA fire chief blazing a trail against the state government and mayor of LA, Karen the Commie, and slating them all for their funding cuts and utter failure. Naturally, Chief Kristen Crowley, an interesting surname albeit, knows that she will be politically scapegoated for this catastrophe, so she is preemptively going after Bass and Newsom. Those who are sinking and cannot swim will of course grab onto others around them, ensuring that they take them down with them. Oh yeah, the DEI hire LA water czar, who makes an annual salary of $750,000 US a year, Janice Quinones, knew about empty reservoirs and broken hydrants months before fires, by her own admission. To put that into perspective in terms of how much she earns, that is double the official salary of the US president, almost. $50,000 off it. Almost double the official salary of the US president. But of course, remember, LA and all of these regions of the West, every part of the West, are all systemically and institutionally racist and sexist and every other istanism. I will leave all of this up to you in terms of how you view these fires. I have a certain opinion on them, but this video is going up to YouTube, so I have to watch what I say. But you can make up your own mind based upon the information that I've already presented here. As Mel Gibson stated, quote, "Well, I know they were messing with the water, letting reservoirs go for one reason or another. They have been doing that a while. California has a lot of problems that, sort of baffle the mind as far as why they do things the way that they do. And in the events like this, you sort of look, well, is it on purpose? Which is an insane thing to think. But one begins to ponder whether or not there is a purpose in mind. What could it be? You know, do they want the state totally empty, unquote? And then very recently, we've had an LA sheriff have a bit of a Freudian slip, where he stated that we have to start thinking about depopulation. Very, very peculiar. Very peculiar indeed. So, to move on to the final part of this very in-depth video, a little quote from the Zohar that enlightens us to the fires that have been raging everywhere, a way to take land for pennies, destroy the generational wealth of the nations, and to sow confusion within the midst of the population. The Book of Zohar, Volume 3, Lech Lecha Vera 212, verse 212, page 440, at least in my version. Quote, "And he destroyed every living substance that was upon the face of the ground." This verse indicates that the ministers who rule and govern upon the earth, namely the angels who govern the peoples of the world, were also destroyed. This is the meaning of every living substance which was upon the face of the ground. For when the Holy One, blessed be He, executes His judgment and punishes the people of the earth, He starts with the supernal ministers to rule them, and after they are destroyed, continues with the people who abide beneath the shelter of their wings, as it is written, Hashem will punish the host of the heavens on high, and then the kings of the earth upon the earth. Yeshua 24:21. So this is verse 212 now, but how were these ministers removed? It was hard for him to understand this point, because the power of death has no control over them. How shall he remove them? And he replied, He drove them through burning fire, as it is written, For Hashem your Elohim is a devouring fire, a zealous El. Devarim 4:24. The Book of Zohar, Volume 2, Bereshit B, Noah, verse 66. Quote, "And are in the burning fire, which they can leave only the first day of the month, and on the days of Shabbat, as it is written, and it shall come to pass, that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says Hashem." Yeshua 66:23. When the Shabbat and the beginning of the month are over, an announcer from the north says, "The wicked shall be turned back to Sheol." Tehillim 9:18. Angels of destruction then gather and attack them with 4 burning winds of fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom. And then they see the light of this world, and immediately as a fiery smoke comes and conceals the ways of light, and it becomes dark. Then the 3 in charge, who have trowels in their hands, use them to fan the smoke and blow it back to its place. Happy are the righteous whose paths and ways illuminate and shine to all directions in the world to come. The Book of Zohar, Volume 3, Lech Lecha Vera, verse 250. Next is the verse, "And Hashem rained upon Sodom and upon Amorah, because the sinners in Gehinnom are punished by water and fire. Sodom was sentenced by the judgment of Gehinnom, as it is written, Then Hashem rained upon Sodom and upon Amorah, brimstone and fire from Hashem out of heaven. One was punished with the aspect of water, the other with the aspect of fire, and both are the punishments of Gehinnom." The Book of Zohar, Volume 2, Bereshit B, Noah, verse 355 to 356. "The Holy One, blessed be He, burns the spirit of uncleanliness from the earth. This is as it is written, I will cause the unclean spirit to pass out of the land." Zechariah 13:2. Exodus 20, verses 24 to 26. The New International Version, the NIV. Quote, "Make an altar of earth for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honoured, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed, unquote. Regarding the LA fire, Karen Ruth Bass, who was first elected to the House of Representatives in the 33rd Congressional District, later to be assigned to the 37th District due to rezoning. 37 times 73 is the Hebrew gematria value of Genesis 1:1, was the LA mayor of the time of this fire. Notice as well the 33. Again, the triangle intersected with the triangle. You understand what shape that makes. There's also other aspects to it. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 to the power of 3 is 27. 27 and 72 are all connected to these names of Yahweh and to Yahweh itself. To the names of the Lord, to the Lord itself. Well, KRB, or Kaf Resh Bet, means to get closer or to approach in Hebrew, which is the root of the Hebrew words for both sacrifice, or literally animal sacrifice in Arabic, korban, both of them are the same in those languages, and krav, where we get the idea of Krav Maga. Krav, or literally battle in Hebrew, is spelled the same way. Again, Kaf Resh Bet. So it's spelled entirely the same. So, what was the LA fire? I leave it up to you. This is all the information I have accumulated thus far. I think there's enough information here that you can make a fairly educated estimation of what the hell was going on with the LA fires. And yeah, for all those affected by these fires, you know, I wish you all the best for the future, and I hope you can rebuild your life, because the individuals who were the architects of this pain and misery, they will do everything in their power to get that land off you, to get that real estate for pennies on the dollar. To conclude, this is all a symbolic message of the incompetency, creeping rot, and systemic failure of one of the largest metropolises at the heart of Western civilization, the centre of the cultural heart of the soft power of American hegemony, is now, at this very moment, a smouldering husk, a corrupted ruin run by escaped asylum inmates. By the inability of the managerial elite to properly remedy this situation and put into effect reasonable preventative measures such as controlled burns. Yes, Rome survived their great fire, but what the fire illuminated to the rest of the world, no pun intended, was the irredeemable decay at the heart of the Roman system. Yet, after the fire, for the Romans it was just business as usual. They didn't realise that the fire displayed and conveyed to the rest of the world the truth of the impermanence and the vulnerability of the Romans to time, to the onset of time, to the onset of entropy. Exchange Nero for Newsom, but the script is still the same. They constantly do this. They repeat the scripts. It's like one giant meta-script, you could say. The writing scrawled on the hallowed halls of history still echo the same message, be it the city of 7 hills or the city of fallen angels. We see the same pattern throughout this sordid and twisted history of a concealed plan to establish a world government by any means necessary.